So let's talk about 26 second half. This is the first time in a long time that I felt like splitting an arc in half, just because this might go a while. We'll see how this turns out, but
Like, even one of the following chapters could probably be talked about more than entire arcs.
and I think it's super reasonable because I think these are the three chapters where I was like, oh wait, Worm is like one of the best things ever. Oh, I
Yeah,
get it now.
like these next three chapters are just like a masterclass.
So let's get to the beginning of it, which is the Theo interlude, part A. I got here and I was like, Bradley, this is like the first character that's had two interludes. And I mean, I guess maybe Pago, but maybe you could argue that that one in 16 was more of a squad thing
Yeah,
until the end, where it was clearly focusing on her. But like, I just thought that was weird because it's like, oh man, a character is important enough to get two interludes, and then they got three. So it's like, oh man,
like
I'm
both
my boy, and I love Theo, so I was super down for this.
main character confirmed.
What all can I even say about this? Hold on. It's a lot of these chapters is Theo and Dinah working together, which was a super unexpected group to be working together to narrow down the best way that they could corner Jack and get that one-on-one fight that's supposed to save the world.
Yeah,
This is the storyline that's been brewing since arc 11. Yeah, 11B, one of my favorite chapters, right? And it's super interesting because in an earlier portion of this arc, Theo talks about how Jack wants me to be his rival, but Taylor, you're truly his rival because you both have this innate urge to plan and scheme and execute and just do the hero thing.
it's like Taylor is driven by conflict, just like Jack, but in a different way. Jack has to be doing something. He cannot sit still, but his is like driven by violence, and hers is by performance.
Guilt, I would say, by it's how she avoids guilt. She doesn't stop moving.
Yeah,
And I think Jack doesn't realize this, and Taylor doesn't realize this, but I think Theo does.
yeah,
And I was worried that, like, oh man, we're not going to get that cool showdown between Theo and Jack. But we super do. And it's fantastic. But before we get there, I really like Theo and Dinah working together, where Theo has like 20 questions to work with before Dinah's power shuts down. And it's such a good narrative device to ramp up the tension even more, as if the stakes weren't high enough. He
because
has.
it's like ticking down on a clock because it's like when we run out of questions.
We're blind.
Yeah,
And I mean, it basically feels like a game over at that point. So they're progressing on the nine. They're all attacking. Jack is fleeing. He's very good at fleeing. And Theo kind of breaks off on his own. And with Dinah's help, he's trying to juggle saving as many people as he can and chasing down Jack. And it becomes a game of, do I attack or do I not attack? And as he runs into scenarios, him and Dinah have to work through the best chance. So there's scenarios where he has to run from a fight or scenarios where he should attack and help out. And whatever's happening, it's narrowing down the chances that they can beat Jack.
yeah.
And like I said, just fantastic story device. It's the kind of thing where it's like so much action is happening that I can't wait to reread this chapter as well.
And even then, when he gets to Jack, Jack is holding a fucking claymore,
It's so cool, man.
and he's riding on a hook wolf, who, by the way, he can use his power on.
That was wild.
Holy,
I was not. So was Hookwolf wasn't there from the start, was he? Because Jack and Theo have a little bit of a scuffle before Hookwolf shows up, or was he always there?
I think he's probably running around.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. You know how Hookwolf be.
You know how he is.
Man, remember when I defended Hookwolf and then my my defense went nowhere?
He's a good guy.
You hate to see it, but I really like how Jack comes out. It's a great reintroduction of like endgame Jack, where His shirt is open, not a fat on his body. He's carrying a giant claymore. He's played by James Franco,
Yes.
and he's just taunting Theo, and he's riling him up. And Theo starts talking that shit, man.
Dude, like, I love this so much, and I was talking to you about it, where I love this moment so much because of Jack's reaction to what Theo says. This is like the one time in the story that Jack loses the smirk on his face. Jack has been in like way tenser situations, even like back when he first met Theo. Theo's like, she can fly and level skyscrapers. Do you really think you're going to get away? And he's like, well, I don't know I'm going to get away. I might die, but it's more fun that way. And he laughs it off. Even under threat of death, Jack is always just having a good time because this is all a game to him. But Theo tells him to shut up. And he says, you're not that clever. You're not as sharp as you like to think. You talk to me about keystones. Bullshit. You're a sad, pathetic killer with delusions of grandeur. And it says Jack's smile dropped from his face.
And then the fight begins off of that.
That, like, this whole scene where Jack shows up and he and Theo talk is one that I picture in my head, like, as film more than, like, even more action-y moments.
Definitely.
Because I feel like you can just do such cool stuff with, like, the lighting and where they are in relation to each other.
And I just imagine a good actor Theo spitting those lines and James Franco's frown.
It's so good.
It's... I was saying that, like, I feel like Wild Bow, as a little side note, I saw some comments recently saying, man, watch The Boys. The Boys is brilliant. And I'm like, The Boys kind of sucks, IMO, but alright. And I just feel like Wild Bow is missing this chance to strike when the world kind of wants a deconstruction of the superhero genre because it's so big. So, like, the quicker he can hire me to screenwrite his show, I'm just saying he can get in there before it's too late. Just call me, man. You have my email.
The past decade or so, we have been in, like, I guess maybe a second golden age of superhero media, if you want to call it that.
As of Avengers, really.
If Worm TV show and or movie came out right now, holy shit. It would take by storm.
There's actual content and depth, and all the little nitpicks and problems I have with Worm don't take away that the grand picture here is what the world is looking for right now, and it would blow minds.
Yeah, so I'm always terrified that if it ever does get adapted to the screen, it's not going to be until after the ship has sailed.
And like, what if it gets canceled like at season 2 or something, and they don't get all the way through? Oh, Wild Bow, please. The world really needs this. Because of scenes like this, this would be fantastic. And they're fighting, like, these warped, like, buildings that, like, Nyx is, like, doing illusions to and stuff like that. It would look so cool. So the fight starts. It's a cool little action scene. And, like, the real big takeaway is that Theo's doing some cool moves. He's really going for it. But Jack is managing to balance offense and defense really well. And I think that's, like, just indicative of Jack. And the fight ends with a very surprising Grey Boy defeating Scion. At least I thought he was defeating him at the time, you know. But, like...
yeah, they see Scion get looped by Grey Boy, and they are just like, oh, fuck.
It's super dire. And we move on to the second interlude, which was Theo again. I was so happy to see this.
Yeah, you were like, what?
What the fuck? A double! And this would be the third Theo interlude, and, like, yeah, he's maybe top 5. Theo's great. I just wish that in the earlier chapters, Theo's voice wasn't so dumb when it was getting read, but that's okay. Man, it was a bad Theo voice. So, this has a bit of a flashback of Theo training with Taylor. This was a really good scene, and a really sad scene, where Theo's thinking about his training with Taylor. He could never really beat her when he was training with her, and he would like, okay, go all out, and she would just destroy him and not have any mercy. And he saw it as like, oh, well, It's because she knows I can get back up and I can keep fighting, and we
But it's
see that.
really-
But it's really what?
But that's how he views it. But
True.
yeah,
Taylor, with how cold she is, I don't think that's what she actually thinks. I'd like to believe it is. I mean, she's not. She has somewhat of a soft spot for Theo.
yeah,
I did also skip the point where he's like, I looked at Taylor and I wasn't sure what to think, like what was going on through her head. Did she kill Aster out of mercy, or did someone else's bullet hit Aster? He's not even sure how his sister died. But that's part of why he's so mad at Jack. His whole family is dead now.
and talking about how he reacts to Aster, because in the chapter where it actually happens, he comes up to Taylor and he begins to ask her about it, and then he changes his mind and leaves, and we kind of find out why. I can't remember if it was in the first or second Theo interlude.
It was in the first one. I forgot to mention it.
Yeah, he says that he wants to ask her about it, but he's terrified of what the answer would be.
Yeah.
Because if she were to tell him something along the lines of it's the cost of doing business, he just doesn't know if he'd be able to take it, because I don't think he views the same way she views things. That
Not at all.
it like, I don't think he has that it's okay because I had to do it. To her, like to Theo, that is a baby, that is an innocent, and he's probably been around people in his time as a hero who have had that philosophy that sometimes you just got to do the bad things, but that's not Theo. And if he heard that from someone who killed his sister, I think that would just break him, and he needs to not be broken right now.
I kind of regret skipping this, but there was a lot of rich stuff in that scene right after the death, where he's like, if someone walks up to me and says something sappy, am I going to be able to hold it in? It's not masculine to show tears and stuff like that and show emotions, so I'd rather just be alone and quiet. And he's like, wait, what if no one shows up to me? What if they all think that this is cost of doing business? And like, there's just a lot of those thoughts.
Yeah, it's like maybe people aren't saying anything to me because they don't want to hurt my feelings, but the other scenario, like, what if they're not saying anything to me because they don't think that's a problem?
Yeah, it's
just crazy.
Fantastic. And I'm glad that this comes up now, and that's actually a good time to come up, because we're getting to these flashbacks with Taylor, right? And we get to see how he had a crush on her. And it's just really sad, because Theo was never like very confident in himself, and now he has this girl that's helping him out, and he's choosing to see the positives of her kicking his ass, like we were just saying. I think that reinforces the fact that I don't think Taylor really thought that, and it's his idealized view of her. But as they're training, he keeps lamenting how like this bond just means that when it's time for business, Skitter or Taylor is going to leave and Weaver is going to take over, and they're going to drift apart.
Yeah.
And it's really sad, because it's all this bond, and he knows what Taylor is working towards and what kind of person she's willing to become when it's time for the end of the world. And it's exactly what happened in the chapter where she kills Aster. It's all business. So it's interesting where this happens, because when we get back, Theo is just obliterated by Jack and Hookwolf's dual attack, which is sick as shit. But he survives. People catch up to him. He gets patched up, and then you get this really intense like final chase with Jack, where he's truly cornered at this point. But he has a Siberian. He has a Gray Boy. There's a couple of other jobbers around. And I got a little confused here. So Theo has like 2 questions left. He discerns like the way to win basically is that a DT soldier would shoot containment foam. Shout outs to containment foam.
Shout out.
And then Tecton would use gravity against Siberian by destroying the ground and making her fall. That was established to be one of the Siberian's weaknesses. She would let go of Jack, and then Tecton would kill him. What I don't get, it plays out just like this. Theo's helping the DT soldier get up with his arms. Foil pretends to be caught in the time loop, which confused me a little bit, but is a cool strategy employed by her. What I don't get is why Gray Boy loops Jack.
Yeah. So let's see here, and I actually have the text up because Gray Boy says words when he's doing it.
Yeah, he's like, if anyone's gonna take you out, it's me, kind of sentiment.
Let's see. Because from what I remember, it's supposed to be that he loses some respect. Okay, here we go. I can read the text right here where Jack had turned gray, trapped, looped, and pathetic, Gray Boy said, stupid, useless. I thought you'd do something interesting, but you've made yourself the prey instead of the predator. If you're going to be the prey, I want you to be my prey. I think in this scenario, like we said, Jack has been on the run now, and he's almost cornered. And I think he's now in a position where he lost some whatever respect Gray Boy had for him by being the prey instead of the predator. Which, holy shit, that thing Gray Boy just said, if it came out of Sophia's mouth.
I was just gonna say, Gray Boy's just Sophia.
There you
go. So I think the catalyst then for him actually is the moment the ground gets shattered. I think that's when Gray Boy's like, well, that's where we lost.
He's like, fuck that.
And then that's when he loops Jack. So Jack is getting hit by the Tecton pile driver over and over now, right?
Yeah.
They trap Jack so he can just suffer in his box. Siberian and Gray Boy are killed by Foil. And yeah, all is well. They won.
And here's where we get the final little beat of that narrative device we were talking about with Dinah's questions being like a countdown, because at the very end here, when they trap Jack and it looks like they've won, Golem is like, Dinah, I need one more question. Just like tell me everything is going to be okay. But she doesn't respond.
Man. So did she have a question left? Is that like, did she run out of power, or did she see the truth?
I think she just didn't have it in her anymore.
God damn.
And then everyone's just kind of like, yeah, I guess we're good. We did it. And then
Tecton's like, Jack was saying some weird shit when I was attacking him.
Shit over there.
And then he whispers it to Theo, and we don't get to know what it is for now.
Ooh. And then we enter one of the most astounding things I've ever read.
Let me preface this. I thought this chapter was unnecessary, but it's so brilliant and such a way to identify Wildbow's writing and what makes Worm special that maybe I was wrong. And when I was saying it was unneeded or perhaps extra, it's because the way I view power systems is like, the more I don't like sci-fi very much at all, really. I feel like you get too bogged down in the how, and then it just kind of kills the pacing of the story, and there's no real mystery. It falls too neatly, and I prefer, like, one of my favorite power systems is Nen from Hunter x Hunter, where it's just like spirit karate with well-defined rules. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Or Stands, where it's like they break the rules all the time, but they're really fun in JoJo's. So I'm like, I could do without like this super in-depth explanation of powers, but this is so much more than that, and it's such a good explanation to boot, where it's like, no, this is just brilliant. This is just like the best thing I've ever read, kind of thing.
Because like, there's so much to it that there's so many things that I love here that we kind of learn why the kind of people who get powers do get powers. We kind of learn like why it seems that powers all have uses in combat. We learn why most powers are at a kind of power level where people can actually fight each other and not like get killed too easily. And we learn even so much more than that.
I think another part that makes this fascinating is Wildbow has set up all these mysteries throughout the story and this one chapter plugs so many of them in. And I love a good weaving of plot threads together. And this is like the ultimate, like, release those good chemicals into my brain.
Ooh.
This fits into so many places, and it's so fascinating. And it's a genuinely really fantastic power system. Like, when you're gonna go sci-fi, you gotta do this. Like, this is so fascinating. And I mean, let's get into it, I guess, to the specifics here.
You had this idea for like the first half of this chapter, which is the entity kind of recounting the earliest parts of its history.
Yeah.
And you were like, it'd be so cool if in the Worm Netflix series, if this was presented kind of like a National Geographic documentary.
The way I picture it, right, because they don't communicate much in this early chapter, you would get like, the National Geographic, where there's a voice, possibly Scion's voice, retelling the story. And by the way, Bill and Ted have names now, kind of. Bill has a name. We'll talk about that later. But so my idea is, you get a lot of the dialogue. I guess it's not dialogue. You get a lot of the text in the chapter through a narration in a National Geographic, where it's kind of exploring the biology of the entities, right? And you get like, that's a way that you can explain shards. It's a way that you can kind of explain their overarching system. You can show them eating each other when they're running low on resources and kind of like consuming one another and trying to remain big so you don't get consumed. That whole biology and history that they have. And it would be cool, like, as he's explaining it, there's a very specific way National Geographic does things, where they will have the voiceover and then they would just let the footage linger with like natural sounds. Like, think of like a lion eating its prey. The dude would be like, and the lion clutches its claws into the prey. And then there's like a pause as you like hear the natural sounds of the lion actually attacking the prey. I feel like you could do a lot of that with this, where like you explain a little bit about the entities and then you just kind of let them play out and you get to visually see just the weird ways that they interact together. Anyways, Wildbow, the roundaboutcast@gmail.com. I'll be waiting.
Yeah, and so we kind of learn about their early history, where they kind of detonate their planet and spread throughout the cosmos, and they begin finding life out there and borrowing from the evolved abilities and imaginations of whatever they find out there.
Storing
and it's really,
them in shards.
Yeah, they will kind of, because the entities have their own abilities that they are born with. They can, kind of move mass and energy from one place to another. So a shard of an entity will, maybe join with a plant, and it'll say, oh, I'll keep the I'll keep the plant warm or something so it doesn't wilt, and in return I can study it and see, like, oh, maybe it learns about photosynthesis for the first time. That memory is encoded into the shard. And it does this kind of all over a planet that it finds. And then when it determines there's no more information to find, it gathers itself back up, and just like it did in the beginning, it detonates the planet and spreads out again. And I love the way Wildbow delivers this line, because it's like a really short sentence where it's like the planet blows up and they're on their way, and you just kind of like instantly make the connection, like, oh fuck.
Earth is fucked. It's so interesting. Oh my god, where to begin? I just want to say that as I was listening to this, I could hardly finish it, because every couple of sentences I'd have to like theorize something with Bradley. I was just freaking out. It was so fun to go through it. So you get this idea that these entities are like, they're just kind of doing what biologically they're programmed to do, where they had a scarcity of resource and all they did was consume each other before they started doing this shard plan, right? They were just kind of like swimming about in space and eating each other and just kind of fucking surviving until they ran out of resources, right? And they would find ways to consume energy. So it's like they're doing this for the evolution of their race.
Yeah, because this like process where they would war and then they would die out and then they would come back, it had happened so many times.
I think it's
And
100 something times at the beginning of the chapter.
they had kind of probably exhausted every strategy or like method of governing themselves that could probably even exist. They've done this so many times and been around so long. The evolution of their species is just like
Stagnated.
And they need to they need answers that they themselves are not able to conceive of, so they have to go out and borrow from everything else.
I have a question. Do shards have a physical form, or are we talking about strictly metaphysical BS here?
I believe that's the thing, is these are like really strange beings to
Yeah.
understand. I view it as shards are a very physical thing, kind of analogous to a cell in a body.
Mm-hmm. And there, it said that an entity is composed of many shards, yeah?
Yeah.
And I guess, like, that is its ability set that kind of forms its being.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So the whole idea that they had to do this to evolve, it's like they're not even evil. Like, you can't even look at them and say they're evil, because that's just their natural instinct to evolve, and humans do the same thing. We destroy nature and use nature and all of our natural resources to evolve in science and evolve in culture. So it's like, shit, man.
Yeah.
We're fighting a battle against the idea of evolution, against a race that's greater than us. They're classic aliens at the end of the day, just explained way cooler.
Yeah, and like for very early cycles, this was probably a pretty sweet gig for organisms before the whole planet exploding, because
Oh, yeah.
for some organisms it's just like, oh, I get a cool ability that I didn't have before.
I'm a plant that can shoot a laser.
Yeah, and it probably wasn't until later that the entities are specifically like, no, we need to like maximize conflict. These things need to be used as much as possible. And we even see that in earlier cycles, they didn't even really try to hide themselves. They say that there was like an intelligent race that this can assume are maybe somewhat like humans. They at least can think. And the entities would bond with them, and through somehow these hosts found out kind of what the entities were and forcibly removed them.
Yeah.
From then on, the entities are probably like, oh well, shit, we gotta make sure people don't know what we're doing.
Which brings us finally into Bill and Ted.
Ooh.
Bill and Ted, if you haven't watched all of these podcast episodes, is the name that I gave to the entities as we were getting all those trigger visions, because there was always two. Maybe not always two, but it was very clear that there was this idea of a duo moving through space and time and finding humans to give powers to. And I called one of them Bill and one of them Ted. Let's say Bill's the warrior, and Ted is the, what's the word they use? Not thinker, but
I think it would be thinker.
Yeah. So these two find a planet with their weird way of communicating that uses up a ton of energy just to communicate. They find the planet of Earth and they begin their experiment. They very quickly find out how to optimally bond to people having trauma. For example, they start doing it with a guy, I think they're gonna first do it to a guy who's about to rape a woman. But then they're like, oh wait, the woman's suffering way more, let's do her instead. If I was understanding that scene correctly. And they're very quickly optimizing who to bond with.
It's just like, of these hosts, they have to try to understand them, and they can pretty easily see that the ones that are under more stress are going to run into more conflict, which means more use of these granted abilities, which means more things learned.
Yeah. And we had a conversation about how all these things learned are ways that they can benefit their own species. So, like, say, an ability like imps, that's very relevant right now, where imp has the ability to make herself be forgotten. This is the same kind of ability that they use on their host right after the trigger visions. They're like, when people bond with a shard, they get a vision. We aren't really gonna deal with that. We're gonna let that slide. It'll just be easier to put a fragment of this forget shard into all of these other shards.
Yeah. And it's so cool to me on rereads where, like, back in Arc 11, there's a trigger vision, and Taylor quickly starts forgetting it. And she's like, man, this is just like Imp's ability. And I'm like, it's not like Imp's ability. It literally is Imp's ability.
Yeah, it's man. Wow, but you're right. He always knew. I mean, he had for sure knew at least by arc 7 where we see that first vision. But I'm sure there's stuff. I mean, Scions in the first chapter, so
I
the
mean,
first
hey,
arcs, of course, he knew. Um, so something interesting happens as they're setting up in planet Earth, Earth Bet in
yeah.
particular. Um, a third entity shows up, and it bonds with the thinker, and then it says it moves on. This is Jeff. We're gonna call him Jeff.
It's
Oh,
canon.
so Jeff's an interesting case because I didn't see too many people talking about him in the comments either. I'll have some theories about him later, but he deeply interests me. Whether or not he actually moved on and didn't also set up on Earth is something I'm very interested to find out. Or he could have corrupted the thinker, which is Ted, possibly. We'll see as we go on. But basically, all is going well. They're putting their shards in people. Whenever a trigger event finally occurs, it'll pop out and it'll unlock their abilities. Something about these shards I find interesting. They talk about all these things they do. One thing they don't talk about, unless I missed it, they don't say shards make you more aggressive. Do they?
Not outright, at least.
Not outright. Hmm. Because we learned so much about this bonding process, and we learned that they want conflict, but it almost makes it seem like the shards aren't making you more aggressive. Human psychology plus having power is making you more aggressive.
Ooh.
At least that, I mean, maybe there's something down the line that like straight up contradicts what I'm saying, but because they don't, because like when they were bonding with plants, were they making aggressive plants? No, it doesn't. It seems like their conclusion was, oh, we need to give more conflict oriented power so that they're used more often so we can learn more. They didn't necessarily say we need to influence subconsciously people to fight. At least, I mean, I need to reread this chapter every week of my life now for the rest of my life, since that's the worm experience. But maybe I'll get some more insight on that. But
It's
what do you think of that?
the primary motivation here seems that for the sake of efficiency, they seek out a someone who is already conflict prone.
That would make sense. They talk about how they get teenagers because that if a teenager grows up with power, maybe that's more time for them to get acclimated with conflict potentially.
Of course, we also know there are cases of people having kind of elements of their mind being shaped by the power, and of course, maybe we don't know if that's just because of the way their life went having that power, or if it's the power actively doing it to them.
That's why I bring it up because there's been so many beats as of the last few arcs where Taylor is trying to reconcile with her passenger. She's saying, "Dang, I don't know if this is me or if this is my passenger, but I hope I can at least come to terms with the fact that I have a passenger controlling my actions."
Like ones I think of would be Rachel and Noelle.
Possibly. She does like argue with her. I. It almost feels like this whole passenger and thing is bullshit in a way, where like maybe the idea here is that I don't. I would love to see some comments with like some sources to like prove me wrong here, but I almost get the sense that like Taylor blaming stuff on her passenger is a coping mechanism to where like no, that is truly your subconscious, and your subconscious is prone to fight, and it's not something forcing you to. That's just the person that you became when given all this power, and you're blaming it or trying to somewhat reconcile it as the passenger making you do it. I don't know.
Yeah, you can almost wonder because it's like once you learn about the existence of this thing, anytime you do something terrible, you can that opens up like a new avenue
Coping
for
mechanism.
cognitive dissonance where it's like, well, I wouldn't normally do that. Maybe it was the passenger.
And doesn't that in turn make you more conflict prone because you have a new coping mechanism to fall back on?
Ooh.
I don't know. There might be something to this, and I'll keep that in mind as I wrap up my worm journey with these last few arcs. But moving on from that theory crafting, because we'll have more theories.
Oh yeah.
Ted dies. Bradley,
Pour one out for my boy.
pour one out for my big monstrous thing. Okay, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Okay, first of all, Scion as Bill. As Scion is being birthed into the earth, that's also the time where Ted dies, yeah?
Oh yeah.
Coincidence? Possibly not. Ted explodes into a bunch of shards, and this is Scion's. How should I differentiate Scion the Golden Man and Scion the Entity? Is there like a easy like a term for that?
I think we could just call Scion and the entity, or the warrior maybe.
Yeah, let's call it the. So I think so. The warrior sees the thinker shards explode because they're in a different dimension, just kind of like
Yeah.
interfacing with our dimension, which is very interesting. And he's like, "What the actual fuck do I do? We're supposed to work in pairs. The whole idea is that like when we're done together here, we kind of like fuse or exchange information, and then we're able to make it back home or something. Like it's
Yeah.
all part of the plan."
Like his particular version of their species, they've like evolved in such a way that they have to work as a pair, and without the other one, an individual does not know how to complete their cycle, and he sits there for years because he's like it says coming up with alternative things to do is not in his realm of imagination
Because
because
he's the warrior.
imagination is something he lacks. He doesn't think. He can't imagine other things to do.
Can the thinker imagine, or is that also outside their realm of
We'll put a pin
perspective?
in that thought.
Okay. Shit, dog. So all right. Here's Willer theorem number one. My all cauldron powers are made from Ted's shards. I feel super confident saying this. I actually the first thing that made me think of it is as soon as they explained how Scion saw all of Ted's shards flying about, the first thing I thought about was, isn't it weird that in every trigger vision there's like two consistent visions? One of two things traveling and communicating, and then one of them just finds a person, and that's kind of the end of the vision, as I recall. But
Yeah,
then
pretty much.
there's some that have this extra component of a giant creature landing on a planet and dying and spreading its seeds out into the world.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, the first time we see this is with Scrub, which is the second trigger vision we ever see. And we know Scrub is in Cauldron Cape. So that's kind of where that first, I was like, oh, that must be it. And then as the chapter went on and Scion is describing all the Cauldron Capes as dead shards, I'm just like, okay, this is almost confirmed to be it in my mind. So The theory there for me then is that Cauldron found a way to access these dead shards and bind them to people. Possibly, they're not supposed to be able to open portals into the dimensions where the entities went to. But maybe since one of them is dead, they can do it. I'm not sure. Not sure if they're even in the same dimension as like Scion and Ted. But maybe they get like an actual piece of this shard and they distill it into the potions, and by drinking it, it forces the bond or something. That would be my current running theory. What killed Ted? This is something that fascinates me.
Who done it? Now Worm becomes a noir detective story. Scion smokes a corncob pipe and has a Sherlock Holmes hat.
And then he's just like, tonight England dies.
Yeah.
Another mystery solved by the great Scion. So my knee-jerk reaction is to say Jeff killed Ted. Ooh. And Jeff has to be something. There's no way that he just moved on. He bonded with... Fuck, man, there's so many ways. I think there's two main paths it can go. Jeff straight up killed Ted, and add on to that, Jeff makes the Endbringers, and that's like his race's way of learning is by making these unkillable monsters.
Sure, they fit in here somewhere.
They weren't made by Scion, very explicitly.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy to me, because we get to this chapter where it's like, yes, this is the chapter where we learn everything, and it's like, oh, well, actually, we learned like 90% of everything.
There's still some key mysteries, like the Endbringers, right? So either Jeff made them, or Jeff, when he interfaced with Ted, maybe Jeff's race is capable of imagination, or they got some wild theories over there on his side of the camp, and he kind of influences Ted to set this in motion. So like maybe Ted killed itself, and this is all part of the bigger plan. Did Endbringer show up before Scion?
Scion was the first parahuman anything you ever saw.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Ted's in on it, but Jeff's still like the Endbringer guy. Yeah.
Big theories.
I wonder if Jeff would have an avatar, or if the idea is like, I'm just gonna send 3 avatars out into the world, and they're all me. And how I learn is how they deal with humans with powers. That's how I upgrade my shards.
I know if I was making an avatar, I think it'd be pretty badass to be Leviathan instead of a golden
Golden Man. We get the closure of like how the Golden Man was lost in the world, and how Kevin was able to give him a mission, and then he's like, I mean, my mission's already compromised. I might as well do what this guy's saying.
Yeah, because this is the first time that an alternative has presented itself, because he sat there for years not knowing what to do. He can't come up with an alternative. So the first person to give him one, he's like, fuck it, I'm doing it.
It's also interesting that I mentioned earlier how I feel like the entity race is very defined by destruction and evolution. And I think Scion kind of forgot this. And there's this particular line where after Scion has felt pain for the first time of having Ted die and being lost in the world, he talks about how long he had been on the planet Earth. And he mentions that the star revolved around the planet, as opposed to the planet revolving around the star. And I just think that's indicative of his current mindset, because as such an intergalactic being, it's very obvious that planets revolve around stars. But in this human form, he's gotten to a point where he's kind of empathizing with the human mindset. Even though he calls it just a simulation, I think it's affecting him more than he thinks, where he's starting to see the sun revolving around the earth, which is very human-like. It was a weird way to phrase that I felt was very intentional.
Yeah, I And that's a thing that I had never considered until you brought it up. That the way the language is used about the revolutions of the planet and star, because this is a chapter that never gets old to me. I feel like I get something new out of it every time.
I can see why.
Yeah, I love that moment. And any time where it's kind of like humanizing him or introducing human elements are amazing to me, because he had no human elements until he basically made a simulated human brain for himself to understand what it's like to be us, so he could sow conflict more efficiently. But because he does this, he feels that emotion for the first time.
Crushed.
And like you said, he brings up that he says it's just a simulation, but this emotion he feels from his quote unquote simulation is driving what he's doing.
So it's a true emotion.
It's crazy.
That's so good. It's so good.
Ooh.
As I want to back it up, and as soon as like I found out that Bill was Scion, I freaked the fuck out.
It's like,
It clicked so much into my mind. It's like, of course. Jumping to the climax here,
oh god.
because I think we've said enough about the setup and how it's interesting, and it's we can talk about it endlessly, and I'm sure we'll think of some other things to say before we wrap up. But the meat and potatoes here is that Scion just goes on and fights for good. At this point of the chapter, I'm like, yeah, Scion, I believe in you. You are a force. You can be a true human. I had so much optimism back then.
Ooh.
And then I finished the chapter, and I was like, oh no. So the actual end of the world was Scion listening to Jack's words. We have to talk about Jack too, I guess, but the end goal is Jack criticizes Scion for not having creativity, for not creating art, for just being a blank slate. He says, you've done good for so long, but what has it really gotten you? If you want to truly evolve and experiment, basically, like that's how Scion's interpreting it. Why don't you try destruction and evil on for a change?
Because I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this, but like we have hammered in repeatedly, especially like in the Numberman and Bonesaw interludes, that whatever these things are that we now know it's the entities, Jack's mindset is so perfectly aligned with what their goal is. And here he is berating one of the entities themselves for not having the mindset
of an entity.
Yeah, he says, like, you are not, you do no experimentation, you have no creativity. And that's what the shards are here to do, to make these hosts experiment and create and try new things. And he says he berates Scion for not doing this, and Scion is like, shit, he's right.
He's fucking right. I like how like they get Scion out of the situation. Like Lisette calls him and he leaves, but it just lingers on him. He just keeps thinking about it. He's like, Jack called him out and appealed to both humanistic instincts of warring and destruction and using force, but also, and I think most interestingly, Jack reminded him what an entity's goal is, which is to destroy and evolve. And then he just destroys England. He just destroys the UK, just like that.
For the first time in a long time, he not only feels an emotion, but there's an element of satisfaction to it.
By the way, bonus, here's how I'm gonna make this a screenplay for fun, I think, and just release it out when we release this video. Here's how I picture that decision. He lands in the water where we first saw him.
Ooh.
And the camera's zooming into his face. And then we're getting splices of the earlier shots we saw, like the very first shots of the entities just like surviving and consuming in the void. And it's all kind of flashing back to him. and it's eventually he snaps, and he turns around, destroys England, and he has like kind of a smile in his face that it's like a bit of a smirk that shows he's content a little bit about it's an expression that's hard to read. It's not quite happy, but he's feeling something.
And then it starts playing right back where we started from by Cleopatra from the extremely goofy movie VHS.
Exactly. It's so fitting. Oh man. Oh, Worm, you need to exist in film form.
We'll try to make it happen.
Jack, huh?
Man.
How about that Jack? Let's talk about the broadcaster.
Man, what happened to Jack? You know, I wouldn't wish that on what happened to him. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but if I had to choose someone for it to happen to, probably be him.
You mean the infinite loop of getting pile drived?
He's going to be getting his like intestines pulled out under like rocks under a mountain of containment foam for who knows how long.
You know what? No, fuck Jack. See, this is where we're different. Jack's like one of my favorite characters, but fuck him. He needs this.
Shit happens, bitch.
Shit happens, bitch. But you know what? He gets the last laugh.
Because at the end, he accomplished his objective. You know what? You know what? Congrats, Jack. I hope you're happy. I hope you're happy.
He introduced Scion to art, man. He fucking.
I hope you're happy in your fucking time loop under your mountain of bullshit. You did it. You won. You ended the world. Congrats.
Like, Scion, have you heard of trap music?
And he's like, whoa.
Whoa, this shit kind of slaps. and then shit got bad, and I'm just like, what a note to end the chapter on, man. Because it ends with like he felt some sort of satisfaction or relief, and then he just turned around and destroyed another coast. And I am one chapter into 27, and slight spoiler alerts, this boy ain't stopping.
There's no brakes on this train.
Wow,
like,
dude.
Like until the last chapter, there's no more breaks here.
I want to say as soon as I started Worm, I said I think the final villain will be Scion. That'll be the final opponent.
Boom.
Now there's roughly 4 to 5 arcs left, so I think there's still time for me to be wrong because most arcs are 2 to 3.
Greg is still out there somewhere.
Greg is still out there. Cauldron is still out there. I don't fucking who else like I feel like Scion like they can't hold him out for 5 arcs worth of content. He would blow up the planet.
It's just so funny to me because Willer has called them Bill and Ted for so long. Whenever Scion began his rampage, we were talking about Kill Bill today, and I was like, "Oh my god, Worm just became Kill Bill."
I didn't realize how true that was until 27.1. We're literally dealing with Kill Bill here. Oh my god, man!
Speaking of Kill Bill, the reason we were talking about today is because Doofcast, formerly Daily Planet Podcast, has a really good Tarantino talk.
Yes. I gotta watch Kill Bill 2 and talk about it on this podcast so I can finally talk about Django.
We need to watch Kill Bill 2 together.
Yeah, let's do it. Man, it's such a good movie because it's like the first part sets up the bride, but then the second part characterizes her and Bill.
We'll get Joe in there for Kill Bill 2, and then we'll talk about that on the Roundabout cast. Have you heard of it?
Anyways, Worm is the coolest thing ever.
Like this, I can't think of a chapter in a different story that gives me quite the same feeling this one does. Like even within Worm, this isn't my favorite chapter, but
that's crazy, man. I think it's mine.
It just gives me such a strange feeling of everything being connected that I just don't get anywhere else.
What is your favorite chapter?
Oh man, here's what I'm thinking. In our final episode of this, we'll
rank.
We'll give our top 5 ranks, and we can like explain why they place the way they do.
Top 5 chapters, arcs, and characters.
There you go.
It's coming.
That'll be it. I can already tell you who my favorite character is going to be.
It's Rachel. I know you.
Obviously.
Or is it?
Or is it? It's actually Greg.
Of course.
God King Greg.
Did we do this justice?
You decide.
It's talking about it doesn't even sell how well written it was.
It.
We didn't even talk about how all the arc names so far have been communication terms, and how the next arc is called Extinction. How he broadcasts to himself,
Oh man.
which oh man, ooh,
This is just a chapter where even if someone told you that like this chapter was coming, you still would not see it coming. Like what actually it makes you feel.
the execution matters so much because, like I opened it up with, on paper, I don't really want to bog down the power system in the specifics, yet this was the coolest thing in the story because it was executed so well. Not to mention the climax of it was just beautiful and horrifying.
It says like he says it so matter of factly and in only like one or two sentences where he basically shoots England and he says the island just crumples up like a piece of paper in a fist, and then it ends with him shooting out to the opposite coastline of the ocean, and you're like, oh fuck.
The home of Kevin, like that's vindictive, even so cold. All right, we did it in a good time because 20 minutes of this was just talking about the interludes.
Yeah, so
We did good.
uh, I don't know how exactly. I don't know in what way you're gonna edit these into the future episodes, but
This one will be split in two.
yeah, okay.
So
Man, we got like 4 or 5 weeks of worm content done in one night.
not bad. It was a good fucking talk. No Joes allowed. No spoilers for Tyler.
Send your worm questions to the Roundabout Cast Snapchat.
I guess I gotta make that, huh?
You don't have to.
Until Bradley pro Jared's the step.
Oh no.
All right, goodbye everyone. Bradley would never do that, by the way.